Welcome to CSP 383, Chapter 9, Instructional Assessment. When we talk about assessment, assessment is multidimensional. Assessment is making judgment based on the full range of information that we have about a particular student. So how do we get that information? Well, measurement is how we gather information based on a specific dimension of this child's performance. So for instance, if I want to know how well a child reads, then I'm going to have different scales that I'm going to use to measure skills within reading. If I want to know how well a child pays attention in class, then I may do observations to measure that. Testing is when we actually sit a child down and say, do this, and then we measure what it is that they're doing. Evaluation is when we take the things that we have measured and we evaluate what those things mean. Assessment is the big picture of looking at everything we've gathered about that child. And assessment may include things like attendance. It may include things like how many schools the child has been to. So assessment is the big picture. Evaluation is what we do with individual pieces of information that we have. Measurement is how we look at specific skills, and testing is one way to measure. So when we look at assessment for people with cognitive disabilities, intellectual disabilities, what we find is that we've changed the way we look at assessment. That for a long time, best practice was what we called functional assessment. Now instead we look at alternate assessment. So with functional assessment, it was based on what we called a functional curriculum. And so this functional curriculum had 4 dimensions or 4 domains: community, leisure, domestic, and vocational. For kids who were school age, by the way, there was a 5th domain, which is education or school, and that was embedded in the community domain. So domains are actually where you live. As an adult, pretty much everything you do is either in the community, or it's in a leisure setting, or it's in domestic, which is at home, or it's at work, which is vocational. Then we looked at activities in each domain. And so if you look in the community, we had all kinds of what we called environments in the community. So the community might include stores, it might include barber shops, it might include anywhere that you would go in the community. But then we would look at within that particular set, like for instance shops. Let's say we look at Walmart, then we want to look at what are the activities we do at Walmart, and then what are the skills, and then how do we adapt. Everything was what we call community referenced. And so you can't train somebody in general on how to operate in a store. We have to say which store, because shopping in Walmart is very different than, for instance, shopping at Belk. So it would look like this. We would say the domain was the community, Walmart. The activity was buying an apple. The skills would be communication, social, academic, cognitive. And then the adaptation would be picture cards or money clips. What we do now is, instead of using this functional assessment, we've moved to what is called alternate assessment. And alternate assessment, the idea behind it is that children with significant disabilities still need the same curriculum as everyone else. And so we do what's called portfolio assessment. It's designed specifically for students with cognitive disabilities, and it's aligned with the Mississippi Extended Frameworks. And so we're going to assess the child in language arts, which is reading, writing, reading and writing, and then we're also going to assess them in math and in science. We do a collection of student work throughout the year. We do baseline activities, and what a baseline is that's where we start. So at the beginning of the year, we identify the skills that we want to measure, and we measure them at the point where the child is at the beginning of the year. And then we instruct them on those objectives, and we assess these objectives through final activities. And the portfolio is based on information from the baseline and the final activity. And then this is used to determine the child's performance level and the level of complexity within that performance level. Informal assessment is another part of what we do in special education. We do first what are called criterion reference tests. These are age or grade referenced. So when it's a criterion reference test, what we're saying is that at a particular age, there are a set of skills you should be able to do no matter where you live, no matter what curriculum you're in. There are commercial skills inventories, in other words, ones that you can buy, that say, here are the math skills everybody needs in 5th grade. There are also teacher-made skill probes where I say, okay, everybody needs to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and so I'm going to do these skill probes to get at addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. And then we've got what's called curriculum-based assessment. So we know that everybody needs to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, but we also need to know how well does a child do in our specific curriculum that tells us specifically what we want to do with adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. So we have state testing, we have district testing, and then we have teacher monitoring of IEP and curriculum goals. Then we have informal assessment. When we talk about informal assessment, we're talking about several dimensions. One is what we call observation. Well, there are certain things you want to observe. You want to observe how well the child interacts with the teacher, how well they interact with peers, how well they're able to perform the skills that they need to do. So we look at dimensions. You remember I talked about measurement. So when we're measuring from observations, we're looking at 4 different dimensions. One is frequency. How often does a behavior occur? Then we look at duration. How long does the skill or does the behavior last when you do see it? Latency, which is how long it takes from the time I say do it to the time he starts doing it. And then intensity refers to the force with which a behavior occurs. So let's just use an example where we can tap into all of these. If you're talking about children having tantrums, then the dimensions that you would have is first frequency. We want to know not just whether the child is having tantrums, but how often they're having tantrums. Once a week, once a day, 5 times a day. It makes a difference. Duration. When the child has a tantrum, how long does it last? Does it last for 30 seconds? Does it last for 5 minutes? Does it last for 20 minutes? Latency has to do with from the time that the child becomes upset, when does he launch the tantrum? And then intensity, is this a tantrum where the kid just falls on the ground, or is this where he falls on the ground, screams, tears at his hair, and throws things? So when we're looking at tantrums, we may be measuring any one of the 4 dimensions. We may be measuring all 4 dimensions. But there are other behaviors where we're only going to tap into 1 or 2 of the dimensions. So an example of that would be if we're looking at out-of-seat behavior. Which are we concerned with? Are we concerned with how often the child gets out of his seat? Are we concerned with how long he stays out of his seat? For some children, it's not a matter of how often they get out of their seat, because once they get out of their seat, they never sit down again. And so for that child, we're going to look at duration. How long is he out of his seat? For other kids, they're hopping up, hopping down, and so they're never up for more than 30 seconds, but they may get up 30 times in a class period. And so for some children, we're going to use frequency duration and frequency recording. For other kids, we're going to use duration recording. We've already talked about portfolio assessment, and portfolio assessment is used not only as an assessment for outcomes, but for portfolio assessment is also used for monitoring progress. So I've got the portfolio that I'm collecting for my curriculum goals, for my curriculum measurement. But I'm also going to do portfolio assessment just to, as children work, just to see the things that they develop. And then we have what's called a curriculum-based measurement. And curriculum-based measurement is where we're looking at these are the goals in the curriculum and here's what we're going to measure. Now we have a video here and I'm not going to show it to you right now. I'm going to show it to you in the second in our second recording. And then the last thing that we do when we're looking at assessment in severe disabilities is an ecological inventory. In an ecological inventory, remember I told you about functional curriculum. The ecological inventory is used in functional curriculum. Because Mississippi, in fact most states, have moved to alternate assessment, we don't see this used as much. When we see this used, it's being used in combination with the alternate assessment of the so-called real curriculum. And so in ecological assessment, what we do is we have the environment. So in this case, this is the school gymnasium. We have the future environment. So as an adult, where is he going to be? In the adult environment, he's going to be in a wellness center. And so sub-environments at school are the locker room, the bleachers, and the gym floor. And so the activities are changing your clothes, using a locker, showering, roll call, basketball, and line dancing. And so the skills are that they have to dress and undress, they have to tie their shoes, they have to use the locker, open and shut the door, use the lock, showering, washing their body, drying off, being modest, roll call, sitting, answering here, being a spectator, basketball, dribbling, shooting, passing, and imitating steps. And then sub-environments are going to be the reception area, the locker room, the equipment room, the sauna, the running and jogging track, the swimming pool, and the basketball court. And then you see the activities. This is for the future environment. The activities: checking in, checking out, changing clothes, locker, showering, grooming, using the treadmill, the steam bath, the fast walk, the swim laps, and basketball. And then you see all the skills that are involved. So you see that you have a narrower set of sub-environments when the child's in school, but we're trying to train them for this broader set of sub-environments when they get to be an adult. Narrower set of skills when they're in school, much wider set of skills as we transition to an adult. So this is the end of this film. There's going to be a separate that is going to have just the video that I showed you. These are 15-minute, I can only do 15-minute videos, and the film I want to show you is 10 minutes. And so part 2 of the videos for this chapter will be just that video.